Hello my friends, welcome to this support tier list. I will basically cover every single support and give you my thoughts on the champion and why maybe a champion is a good blind pick, is a good counter pick, and so on. Who am I to tell you though? I was a full-time pro player, reached Challenger the past 5 seasons, and now let's go straight into the video. So I would say we start with Z tier, and in my opinion Z tier is like the best champion and a champion that you can always pick right now. For example, the latest patch, this was like Bart, but also Camille, who got heavily nerfed. In my opinion, on support right now, there is no real Z tier champion or like a champion that I would always suggest anyone to pick in solo queue. So let's start with the best blind picks. There we basically start with the melee engaged support. So in my opinion, Leona is really good. You don't really have that matchups. Like even if the enemies go Alistar, go something like Braum or something where they have Disrupt, you would still be super useful because your champion is so tanky. Then kind of same thing applies to Nautilus, especially in solo queue. If you go Nautilus, you will always have your ultimate where you can just ulti one target and you basically always provide tools for your teammates. And also the AD carry combinations with this champions are unlimited. Then the next champion for blind in my opinion is Bart. Bart is a champion that is super mobile, and even if you do a lot of tempo mistakes, for example, as a support, you will still be everywhere on the map because he has such insane movement speed by the meeps. Then also a champion I like, but you need to be really good on him mechanically, is Pyke. You can make a lot of trouble in early game, in mid game. You can provide full vision for your teammates. You can roam basically anywhere on the map, and I think this champion is really nice. Then another champion that is really underestimated in my opinion is definitely Alistar. Yes, a lot of people will tell me now, yes, Alistar blind, blah blah blah, it's so hard to play the early levels. I totally agree on that one. You just need to learn how you want to play with Alistar, the first 3 levels kinda, and the moment you're at level 3, you have sustain, you have tools, you basically have everything that you need. So just to try to survive the first 3 waves, and then you will have a good time. And then my last blind pick champion would still be Lulu. I think Lulu has a lot of combinations, especially with the strong AD carries right now. Something like Zeri or like Yunara, you have a super good pairing with. And basically this champion is always good if you have some sort of hyper carry or champion that is actually good with your shields. Then let's move to the more fun part. In my opinion, there are a lot of counter picks on support, and the first one I want to mention is Sona. Sona is really good if the enemies, or like especially in solo queue, if we get like any sort of free scaling lane. Like let's say the enemies blind Taric or something. I feel like Sona is actually a really strong champ. Then by talking about Taric, next counter pick is Taric. I think Taric can be a super good counter into Nautilus, for example, or if the enemies have a lot of engaged tools. Like let's say the enemies have like Vi and just want to go in like Vi Nautilus rotation or something, then I think Taric is actually a really valid champion and something that is really underestimated. Next counter pick would be Shen. Shen is currently played a lot into Camille, for example, but also into any other engaged support options. I think this guy is really good in solo queue as well because you can actually use your ultimate to be anywhere on the map. Then a more classic counter pick, Braum. I think it's pretty simple to understand this champion. If the enemies have a lot of melee, have a lot of engage, you are playing a disruptive champion, then Braum actually becomes good, but you also need a good combination on champions that can actually proc it. Like Lucian is really nice, for example, anything that can auto attack on AD carry. Then another one would be Blitzcrank. For example, Blitzcrank really good if the enemy is just blind enchanter and you want to have a lot of agency as support, then Blitzcrank is nice, but if you're playing Blitzcrank, you really need a good vision game. Then also not seen that often is Soraka. In my opinion, Soraka, if you're really good on this champion and your team can provide CC, then this champion actually becomes insane. Another counter is Zoe. In my opinion, Zoe is not really played a lot on support, but especially with combinations like Caitlyn and the Mandate, I think this champion has potential. Then I still have Sylas. I think Sylas can be good into something like Alistar or something where you can actually steal a lot of ultimates. Then let's talk about the good combination part. I think there are a few champions that immediately come to my mind. So let's talk about Seraphine. Seraphine has a really good pairing with Ashe. So if your AD carry in solo queue is already hovering Ashe, then maybe Seraphine is a good option. And I would even say that the champions that need a good combinations are probably even S tier champions, or rather S tier combinations. Of course, if you're playing duo queue, for example, then it's way easier to just draft these combinations. Then we're still having Karma. I think Karma is really good with Caitlyn or something like Jhin if you're actually having a good matchup. Then the classic one, Melee Lucian, right? Often played in pro play. You can also do that in solo queue, but I would only advise you to do it if you're actually duo queue, because usually in solo queue, especially in lower ranks, I think Lucian Melee is not performing that well. And then we're still having Lux with the obvious combination of Caitlyn. I think if you're really good on Lux, then this champion can actually be pretty impressive. Then let's go down into A tier. I think Camille is actually a champion that is still viable on support, but he got nerfed pretty hard also by Hail of Blades and the shields, so I'm not too sure about it yet. I would put her in A tier because it's probably still playable, especially if you have good combinations with her. Another one is Rakan. Rakan is even close to as blind, I would say, because this champion is like a all-rounder. He's like not an enchanter, not an engage, but he's like secondary engage. You can always follow up, stuff like this, but you can also find angles yourself, of course. The next one we have Yuumi, especially in solo queue. I think this champion can oftentimes just scale for free and then be super useful. Kind of same thing applies to Zilean. I think with Zilean, you are more reliant on like a good matchup rather than a good combination, but Zilean, for example, really good with the Jhin. If we're talking about Yuumi, right, Yuumi is probably pretty good with Zeri, but also with Ezreal. But if you see a good Zilean angle, like let's say the enemy is just blind, something stupid again, I think this champion can be insane in your games. Then another one is Poppy. Also often talked about as a counter pick. I think Poppy, for example, is good into anything that can dash. Like let's say the enemies would go Rel, for example, then I think Poppy already has a lot of value. Yeah, then the next one is Rel. I think Rel is a bit worse than Leona and Nautilus, but this champion is for sure still a really good champion if you want to find any sort of engage. I think Rel is often played into Nautilus because you can also break his shield. I like this matchup. So yeah, if you're more of a fan of Rel instead of Nautilus or Leona, that's totally fine. The next one, also really underrated, is Elise. I think Elise has good pairings with like Caitlyn, for example, and you can play it bot lane, but it's for sure something more solo queue specific. Then the next one is LeBlanc. Here it's kind of the same. And then there are still like a few crazy picks like Pantheon that you can pick. And in my opinion, they are pretty strong because you have like super good burst. And in solo queue, you know, games are really chaotic. Then let's go into B. I think here we have Nami. Nami got touched a lot. I think the moment where Nami lost her mandate, this champion is like kind of not that good anymore. Also, the Lucian combination is kind of out of the game because everyone is just pairing it with Melio. The next one is Tahm Kench. I think Tahm Kench can actually be a good champion. Especially if the enemies have like lockdown tools on one target and you can save one target. Like let's say you have, I don't know, like Jinx, for example, and the enemies have like Vi, Camille, and just jump onto like one target, can also be like another role, you know. Then Tahm Kench actually has value, but you need to see like a lot of champions of the enemy for that. Same thing with Thresh, kinda. I think if you're OTP, maybe this champion is kind of a A-tier champion, but you're having a lot of matchups that are really hard to play and not really that nice, and you're also needing a good AD carry combination. Of course, your Lantern is really important when you're playing this champion, and like most of the times you play it with immobile AD carry. Then we're actually having Amumu, and if I think about it, in my opinion, Amumu is actually a good blind pick that you can just play on support, because the enemies will also expect it to be jungle, so maybe they pick jungle, and you can like get a counter pick by that in solo queue. But you're simply having a lot of engage tools. So in my opinion, this champion is really good, and I would highly advise you guys to play this champion. Then the next one is Brand. It's kind of like full solo queue champion. I don't think this champion is really that good. Same thing for Maokai. I think Maokai is just way better in jungle. And then we're still having Renata. I honestly think that Renata can even be a neat good combination champion because she's really good with Kalista. So if you're an insane Kalista player, then I think this champion can be pretty good. As the last champions, we have Morgana. I think this champion is completely outdated. And then there's Senna, in my opinion, the most useless support in the game. And that's it with my tier list.